Good morning, everybody. Oh, the mic has just been switched off. I hear my body. It's quite weird. So, first of all, everybody, very welcome, and thank you for coming today. A couple of bits with housekeeping. The toilets are just out that door there and to the right. And if there is any kind of emergency, we've got a lovely big double door there to get out very quickly. I'd just like to remind people that as well as this meeting happening here, it's also happening online, so there are people joining us on Zoom. So I want this to be quite an interactive meeting and to hear from you. But when we are doing that, I'd be grateful if people could wait until you get a microphone in your hand to speak, so that people on Zoom can hear you properly as well. And just to say that there is a member of the press here who's taking photographs, so if anybody has any issue with a photograph being taken, let us know. But just to make you aware that that's happening. Oh, two members of the press here, right? So there are photographs, and these are public meetings, so things are being recorded. But it's just useful to bear that in mind that everybody's aware of that. So in terms of today, I'm mindful that there's a lot of faces in the room I recognise, and people that we've been talking to throughout this process, and people who've been to previous conversations in Cromwell. So I just want to do a quick check-in. Is there anybody in the room who feels they don't understand the options available that we're consulting on and who wants me to spend a bit of time on those? Or are you happier if we skim through that a bit more quickly and do a bit of an update on where we are and then let you talk? So first of all, is there anyone who doesn't understand the options and wants me to spend time on those? If we do a raise of hands on that. No, great, that's what we thought. Okay, so this speechy bit won't take as long as Cromwell then, and we can get into having a conversation. So the purpose today really is, you've all seen these maps before, is just as a reminder that we are talking about something that we're doing as part of our overall integrated primary maternity system of care. This was a strategy that we launched in 2018, and we're working through various elements of that to address service gaps across the district and to ensure that we're distributing resources and facilities in an equitable way and in a way that reflects what's happening with our population. And obviously we've been through a process here where we're talking specifically about, it was I think action 7 in our original strategy, around where we should have birthing facilities in the central Otago, Wanaka area. And that's our current setup at the present. And what we're talking about, and again, I do keep labouring on this because a lot of feedback talks about secondary type care, and it's just kind of reiterating that point again, that what we're talking about is a primary birthing unit, which is around physical setting for assessment, labour and a birth. And this doesn't provide secondary or tertiary maternity services, such as epidural, C-sections or medications to help with labour. And I know a lot of people in this room get that. But again, when we get our feedback, a lot of the feedback that we're getting online is about people saying, I don't understand why I can't have a C-section in Cromwell, for example, but that's not what we're consulting on at this point in time. These are the numbers we've currently got in our existing unit that serves this population, which we've shown before, so they're very similar to what you would have seen before. So as you can see, in 2019 there were 68 births in Charlotte Jean Maternity and 146 postnatal stays. And again, we've had it reiterated throughout this consultation how important that postnatal care element is for people, that even if you do end up birthing in Dunedin or in Cargo, that there's somewhere homely and local to get that postnatal care and get that started with breastfeeding and things like that. So there's our numbers up there around births by territorial authority, and we're going to talk a little bit more about numbers because Deb and Peta in particular have been really helpful with providing us with the kind of more up-to-date numbers of what they're actually dealing with, so we'll talk about those a bit later. And just to say, Jamelza, correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the things we've realised in some of these numbers is home birth data hasn't been in there, and obviously home birth is quite significant here because in the absence of primary maternity facilities, lots of women in this area choose to home birth. One of the bits of feedback we've had from Cromwell and in various other parts throughout this consultation has been people questioning our population stats and questioning our reliance on Stats New Zealand for numbers about population projections. So we've engaged with colleagues at Queenstown Lakes District Council because they've been doing a lot of work in this area, because obviously with all the other master planning that's happening for Queenstown. And here's their most up-to-date set of projected figures for overall population numbers. And one of the things that's interesting in this is they have done a post-COVID update. So their pre-COVID update was assuming a growth rate of 4% for residents, and they have readjusted that now to a 2.5 rate. So again, what they're saying is they still expect the population here to increase, but it's just a slightly slower rate of increase, trying to factor in. And that could change as well, because we're in very early days with COVID and we don't really know how that is going to play out. But again, I suppose it's trying to assure people that we are trying to deal with live data and trying to deal with the situation as best as we can possibly know it at this point in time. So these are some numbers that Deb and Petra have provided us with, who were the two LMCs looking after the bulk of women last year in Wanaka. So 161 women received care from them between July 2019 and July 2020. 65% of those women had uncomplicated pregnancies. And as you can see, 34% of the births took place in Wanaka or at Charlotte Jean Maternity Hospital. So we're using these numbers now as our sort of baseline for working out what's the likely rate of births and likely utilisation of a local birthing unit. I'm very happy to take feedback on that, but we felt that we obviously heard a lot of concern at previous meetings that our data wasn't reliable and wasn't reflective of the situation as it was. So we're hoping that by doing that we're getting a baseline that people feel more confident about us using. So again, we've run through a lot of this before about how we came up with the original options, and I'm not going to linger on these. As said, we'll just flick through. People know that there's two single unit options, either Dunstan or Cromwell, and two options that talk about two facilities. And in both of those options, that would include a facility here at Wanaka. And that's our options comparison. Another really useful bit of feedback we got at Cromwell was somebody queried why we were relying on timings which were around 30 minutes and 60 minutes, and suggested we needed to factor in a sort of a 45-minute timeline as well. And what was interesting in that is you can see that it had quite a significant change on option 1 for Cromwell, because Cromwell is within 45 minutes for 95% of the population. So again, it's really, these meetings are really helpful because people who know what it's like on the ground give us the feedback that helps us kind of refine things further. So we're into our round 2. So here's our online feedback. So as you can see, it's been mostly parents and people who are currently pregnant who are feeding back, but also very significant numbers of health professionals. 37 might look small compared to the number of parents, but that's quite a bulk of health professionals here in this area. And I think this is a consultation that people have working in health have taken a really big interest in. Who we heard from? Wanaka. This is a hugely important issue here, and I think that's the piece. I mean, we knew it was important, but I think in particular this second line of consultation, it has been overwhelming, the response from this part of the district, which is why we're here today, because we thought we can read all this online, but there's something about hearing it that kind of helps make it richer for us as well. These are all the other people we heard from. So as you can see, there's quite a big list of stakeholders here, and with all of these different groups, we've either had Zoom meetings or face-to-face meetings. This isn't just kind of written submissions, this is like quite engaged and detailed interactions with people. If anybody feels that there's someone important who's not on that list who should be, by all means shout and let us know, because this is probably the final sort of piece of big engagement that we're doing, and we're going to be getting stuck into really getting our heads around writing up a paper and some recommendations over the next week or two. But if there's anyone that you think should be on this list that isn't, let us know and we'll do our best to get to them. In terms of option preferences, we did ask people to vote for what their preference was, and I think I did say in Cromwell it's not a big brother popularity contest, because there's lots of factors to take into account, but it is important to understand what people perceive as being the best option. And as you can see, the two-unit options were the ones that got the most votes, with the preference to keep the Charlotte Jean and put a new unit in Wanaka being the highest one. So that's what people have told us so far on that online. And then most people didn't express a second preference. They were quite clear about what they wanted. that was interesting too. So we asked people what was most important in terms of the factors we needed to take into account. And so the one that people said they felt was most important was acceptable travel times. With expedited transport, secondary care and emergency being the next most important. So, what we heard, and this is again capturing some of the stuff that we heard the first time, but a little bit of extra nuance around some of it. There's a very strong voice from LMCs about the importance of 24/7 midwifery backup. And again, some of this doesn't necessarily then reflect on what we got on the voting preferences, because obviously the voting preferences is a large public component, and there is shifts in difference in what people from different sides of the discussion perceive as important. The rapid access is essential, and again, this comes through as well. It's quite interesting on the commentary, because people vote one way and then their commentary will be all about the urgent stuff. And I think I was saying that at Cromwell too, about the strength of kind of concern that was expressed. And I think that's reality. I mean, I think Wanaka is, I mean, I haven't measured this exactly, but I'm pretty certain that Wanaka is probably the furthest from base hospitals for New Zealand, and certainly in terms of a significant population that's living at quite a distance from a base hospital. So I think not just in maternity, but across all health services, that issue around expedited emergency transport is really important here. Part of talking to Otago helicopters was we said, well, what are the times? Let's let people know what this looks like. So those are the times for getting a chopper out if somebody needs to be retrieved. And as you can see, there's factors there around, you know, the actual time from Tyree, where the choppers are based, to Dunstan is 35 minutes. You've then got to load and get back. And in some cases, particularly where a baby is going to need support, you will have to go to Dunedin Hospital first and pick up a team for the retrieval and all the equipment that you need. So that obviously adds a layer of time factor on as well. And as you can see, there is differences. There's basically sort of 5 minute or so difference between the different locations. It doesn't look like a lot when you just say it's only a 5 minute difference between flying to Dunstan and flying to Cromwell, but actually those 5 minutes can be really important when you're dealing with an urgent situation. And again, these flight times are best case. You know, there's always the bit that something's not quite ready at the time, the weather isn't great, the weather changes en route, you've got to take a slightly different travel route or whatever. But we thought it was helpful to make sure that all of that's clear and that people know what those things mean. Again, reiterating the point, the equity of travel times, co-location with other health services, especially medical support, is valued. Taking account of pace and locations of population growth, and to be future-proof. You know, one of the things I was struck with in the feedback is people really do understand the challenges around making decisions for investment of public money, and the fact that if you're going to make a big investment and any kind of build, you're into 6-figure sums and 7-figure sums. So people do understand that that's important to get that right and to make something that's fit for purpose over time. And again, and I was talking to a few people about this earlier, one of the things I really feel in this consultation is that for me, it has started a conversation. I think, you know, and to a large extent, we're talking about a location here. There's a whole other set of conversations we need to have about what model of care looks like, what quality looks like, how do we keep improving that over time, how do we keep this on our radar so we don't just build a pretty building and walk away and go off, job done, because we know that's not job done. We'll have to keep responding to how things change and how population needs change, and keep working together to make sure that we're improving quality of services all the time. And I spoke before about one of the concerns we had was some of the feedback. We have a small Maori population in this part of the country, but we were very concerned to hear that people didn't feel that their cultural needs were being met and that the care was supported at all times. And we heard a lot about how valued Charlotte Jean is, and how a lot of particularly the kind of ethos, the homely environment, the level of care, that sense of it being part of the community, how important that was, and that we don't want to lose that. And to get on with it, you know? and that's a challenge, because it's trying to get that balance right of making sure we've heard from everybody, we've taken a bit of time to consider what you've said and to check it out and triangulate it, and at the same time get on with things, because we could spend another 2 years talking about this, but at some point we have to say, right, we've heard as much as we can hear, and this is the sense we can make of it, and let's get going. And again, that piece around understanding what's available at primary versus a secondary facility, and I have to say this bit does concern me. I get worried that people think if we build a primary unit that they suddenly think I don't need to make a considered choice about the fact that even though it's 3.5 hours away, it might be safer for me personally to be at a different type of unit. And I know that's a huge part of what LMCs do is helping women make good decisions in that. But I am concerned about the level at which in the feedback, people don't really understand the difference between a primary and secondary birth. And probably everybody in this room does, because you're the ones who are interested enough to be here, but some of the wider conversations we've more work to do on that to make sure people understand that. And it's that conversation about the trade-offs, and I suppose that's been the piece that's been interesting in this second round of conversation, is trying to get that feel, because while the voting would say, right, we could put a unit in Wanaka, and we've just made a lot of people in Wanaka very, very happy, we do have to think about those trade-offs, what's financially sustainable, what's long-term sustainable, what can the workforce sustain, etc., etc. And as you saw on the graph, Wanaka residents would strongly prefer a facility based in Wanaka. So decision-making criteria, we're going to be getting stuck into writing all this up next week. And these are the kind of headings we'll need to be thinking about and starting to weigh up against each other. And Helen is here today as the chair of the Central Lakes Locality Network, and we're working really closely between the network and the project team in the DHB to make a joint recommendation on a preferred option. And there's going to be some staging on this. One of the impacts of the COVID outbreak in Auckland is it did have an impact on how much we could do, even though it was far away. We were actually supporting some of the Auckland response, and we had to get ready down here in case things spread. But so what we've decided to do is, originally we had hoped to be bringing a recommendation in October, because we've had to take a bit of time over the recommendations. I actually think that was probably a good thing. What we're going to do instead is bring a draft paper to the October board, which will give the board an opportunity as well to comment on our initial thinking and to get their voice heard on that. And then bring a final paper, hopefully with a final recommendation for a decision to the board in November. Again, though, I would repeat what Chris Fleming said in Cromwell, which is we want to make the right decision. And if something comes up today that means we need to go away and have a look at another bit of data or think a bit harder, or if when we bring a draft paper to the board bring up some issues or say, actually, we're not confident that you've spent enough time looking at X, Y, or Z, or we want more information about some other element, we will take that time and get the right decision, but it won't be unduly dragged out, because as I said, we heard, get on with it. Okay, actually, I'm going to go back on that one before I start talking about that one, and I'm going to pause there. So really, like I said today, I don't want to talk for too long, and you do need to maybe stop me sometimes, because I do talk. But we would like to get feedback from people here in Wanaka, what you think, and what are the things that you really think when we're going away and starting to draft that up and draft up those recommendations. What is it you want us to be thinking about and reflecting on?
Hi Mary.
Hi Linda.
I'm Linda Baker, one of the LMC midwives in Wanaka. For those who don't know me, aspiring midwives. Just a couple of comments. One was on the slide about the rating of importance, you know, on the online questionnaire that went out. My understanding was that that's been taken out of the, that they stopped asking that question a little while back because of there was a sense that asking people what's more important was really hard for people to rate, because everything was important, whether it was time to the facility or, you know, proximity or access to helicopters and stuff like that. Is that still the case? Because like, if you're commenting on it today, does it still form part of the decision making?
So based on your feedback, Linda, and some other people made similar comments that they were concerned about those being rated, what we did was we stopped making it a required question. So originally, if people were responding, we kind of had that as a required, you must answer this to move on. We changed that then because people weren't, based on the feedback we heard people weren't comfortable with that. But we left the question in there. But what I would say is that you're absolutely right. And I think all of those factors are really important, and the interaction between those factors is important. So for example, if your travel time is longer, you might have a different suite of services available than if it's shorter or whatever. So they are interrelated. But really the purpose of that question was to get a feel for what is it that's bothering people most or what is it that impacts on people's decision making most when they try to decide. But absolutely, we're not going to be, we will be thinking about potentially weighting some of the criteria in a decision, but the vote on that will be one element of determining the weighting. It won't be the sole determinant of weighting. It'll be that wider consideration of all the factors. But we did hear what you said about that, and you weren't the only person who was concerned about that.
Thank you. And just the other comment, just in terms of statistics and numbers that you're working from. Historically, it's obviously in eBay, 19 midwives in Wanaka, Big Deb and Peter and midwives, and now you have aspiring midwives working also. So, and for example, I carry full caseload too. So I would invite and encourage engagement with aspiring midwives to get our future projections as well, and input from us on where women are planning to birth, and just to help influence some of the decision making. Because as we know, the landscape has changed. It's changed in terms of who's here, and also, like you say, COVID has changed who's here.
If you want to pin that down, Linda, because I mean, this Deb and Peta just emailed their numbers, so by all means, send me through what yours are. We thought it was useful because it was a recent completed year, and I do absolutely recognise that there's more midwives here now, and which is great, and that there may be more coming into practice here as well. So that, as you say, that will change things a little bit. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christy James. I'm just a mum here in Wanaka, and just one of the kind of major discrepancies it seemed like in the slides was that what you heard and what was voted on were very different, and particularly the 24/7 care for Wanaka. And this could just be my ignorance, but could you just explain why 24/7 care is not an option for Wanaka?
So I wouldn't say it's not an option, but what I would say is that if we are having, Wanaka is always on the basis that there's 2 units. So if we have a unit in Wanaka, we would have to have 2 units, because it's highly unlikely that anyone would travel from Roxburgh, for example, to Wanaka to give birth. And we know there's really strong evidence that people tend to not travel away from base hospital. So if we were to have a Wanaka unit, that would mean we would have to have 2 units to cover the area. And so when you get into that piece then about 24 care, that probably means double the staffing requirements to staff 2 units. But it would be for broadly the same number of births and postnatal stay. So this is our next slide, which I'll let Heather talk to, because she's done some of the work on this about what would utilisation look like. And you're right, it's one of the big things that we're wrestling with. So what is that balance of how much care you want to provide and make available, like as a kind of a lock-up and leave type unit, versus 24/7. And I think the other really big factor here is that bit I said at the beginning, that this is the place that's furthest away from base hospital. So what might be considered a safe level of staffing, let's say in Winton or Balclutha, which are, you know, within an hour of a base hospital, we would have to think carefully about how appropriate that is when you're that bit further away. So that is something we are really wrestling with, and probably is kind of core, you probably identified the core issue that we need to get to today. So I'll hand the clicker over to Heather and let her talk about the numbers that we run on that.
I'm Heather Liddell. I'm the Director of Midwifery for Southern District Health Board. And so I guess it might be useful to talk about, there's two different kinds of expenses. So there's the expense of building a facility, and then there's the expense of operating the facility. So what we're talking about when we talk about 24/7 midwifery is about the cost of operating the facility. So it's really, really difficult to make a good estimate about utilization. And there's all kinds of different formulas. So I just want you to take this with a big, giant pinch of salt, that we know that it's really difficult. That's why there's a range. So I'll just talk you through the numbers and the assumptions that are underlying it. So if we had a Wanaka, if we had a unit just in Wanaka, the assumption is that it would be predominantly utilized by people within this catchment area. So instead of basing that number on the slide that was just based on the births by TLA, we've done it based on the numbers that we got from Deb and PETA for that calendar year, which was 160. And I did the math of 20% utilization rate, which is about what Charlotte Jean is. So about 20% of the catchment area currently utilizes Charlotte Jean. And then I went to a top utilization number of about 40%. There seems to be about 30% is the usual estimate. So based on that, when you do the math, that means that we have a baby born at the Wanaka unit every 6 to 11 days. If we then had a postnatal stays from 65% of the population, which again is about where Charlotte Jean is, and that seems to be about the maximum of our other primary maternity units around the district, is about 65% of the population will utilize the local primary maternity facility for postnatal stay. So that means we would have about 104 families staying postnatally. If we estimate that they stay for 48 hours, which is what's funded. Sometimes some people stay longer, some people stay shorter. I would use the estimate of 48 hours. That means we have somebody in the unit about every other day, plus a birth every 6 to 11 days. So if we were to 24/7 staff that unit, that would mean 3 8-hour shifts of paying for 3 8-hour shifts of midwives for a birth every 6 to 11 days, and occupancy rate of 57% of the time. A Central Otago unit, I used the estimate of 205 births, which is the TLA estimate plus 10% to add for a home birth rate. So just plucked 220 births for that one. That would be and again, that the assumption is that it would be only people from that area utilizing that unit. And that would be a baby born at the unit every 4 to 8 days. And 143 families, again, that's 65%. So we have an occupancy rate of 78%. So almost a family every day. If we had a combined unit, so that's then adding the whole catchment area together, that's a birth every 1 to 3 days. And that's 247 families staying in an occupancy rate of 1.4. So you can see why staffing 24/7 makes a lot of sense for that last option. And also is a lot more affordable because of course the income stream that's coming in is going to match your staffing level. Does anybody have any questions about that? be very easy to debate these estimates.
And please do, because we want
Yeah.
to present a balanced view to the
Yeah.
board on this, and one that considers a range of options in terms of cost and income flows and things like that.
I just wanted to, probably from a professional point of view, as Eileen says, we're actually providing 24/7 care with or without a unit.
Yeah.
So my concern is that, and what we currently have problems with, is that we don't have great access to somewhere to triage people and put them on a helicopter, for example.
Yeah.
So whether we have a unit here or not, the midwives are still providing the 24/7 care.
Yeah.
For free, but that's another thing. Yeah, it's just, I don't know if you've thought about that. And something that highlighted me the other day when we were talking in that meeting about, which is a bit of a side note, but about the emergency care here, what is it, the weekend care not being run anymore. That's actually going to put more pressure on the LMCs, because our women are going to come to us for all sorts of things that we can't actually triage.
Yeah. So I guess what we've heard from midwifery is about how important having a place that has a midwife already on site to help respond to any maternity emergency that's happening. So we've heard that really clearly. And so it's about thinking about how can we make that happen in a way that is affordable and equitable and is actually going to work to serve both the, obviously ultimately the families, but also support the midwifery practice.
So can I just make a couple of comments just around this? Firstly, I mean, it's really difficult numbers to grapple with, because you're trying to, work out projections, and we know that actually if if there was a unit here, the utilisation may change, things like that. And this is based on births and postnatal stays, and I think that only represents a proportion of what would go on in any unit, particularly a unit in Wanaka where you are at the greater distance. And so again, very difficult to get a handle on, because the current service specification is around births and postnatal stays. However, what you heard really clearly in the feedback was around support for women who require some kind of secondary service. We already have in Wanaka, in terms of things that have changed in your hub concept model, telehealth, different sort of secondary support clinics running. That would run out of the unit too, as is the potential for many of the services to run out of the unit. So I think if we're looking at a really long-term projection, it's a little naive to base it just on births and postnatal stay, because you have to look at what else is the potential to make something sustainable over time. And when you build that into your argument, you then also start to look at what is the cost to everybody in Wanaka that would be the most removed if you went to still currently the most removed, and if you went to a single unit would still be removed. There's a massive cost that then goes back onto the families and onto the workforce if you have any significant travel to one unit. So when you pull this up, you go, yep, occupancy wise looks great, put one unit there, but that would be great to get 24/7 staffing. I think the 24/7 staffing is a slight red herring in terms of there is 24/7 cover, and it's not that if a unit was sitting there and it wasn't staffed all the time, staff wouldn't come in when there was a need. The problem with that around is compensation for those staff and having people on call, but I think that's something that can be solved. And also, if you're going for a long-term growth projection, if the population's growing, the usage will grow, the ability to staff is going to grow over time. So I think my caution would be, don't look at just what is, look at what is the potential to be in considering this.
Can I just reflect back a couple of things that I heard, just to make sure that I got it? I guess when you talk about the other services that we could provide in, I guess we take it as in terms of developing what a high quality facility would look like. I think for any of the options, what we would want to see is a full range of services. We would want to see everything that we're providing at the hub, with it happening within a primary. So that's the telemedicine. So I guess that doesn't help us differentiate between options, because we would see that would be the model of care for any of those options. So that was the first thing. And the second thing that I heard you say is that if we had primary maternity unit in Wanaka that didn't have 24/7 on-site coverage, that there would, that they're acknowledging that there are different ways, and certainly around the country, there are different models for how primary maternity units are functioning. I think the reason that we made this calculation is that the feedback that we got from the LMCs particularly was so strong that what was needed was a midwife on site, not that you have to pick up the phone and bring somebody in. So that's part of why that reflects what we heard. But that's, thank you for that. Any other comments on that point?
I guess this is kind of jumping in on a slightly different note, but behind the scenes, there's a group of us who've created a Wanaka Maternity Trust. Now, this began before this public consultation suggested that you were really close to listening to what we wanted. But the trustees, myself as a mother, my name's Irene Bentley, and we've got another community member, and then we have three very familiar faces, Katie, Emma, and Morgan. And we are working together because we think we need the unit, we need it sooner perhaps than, well, initially than was going to be provided. But we reckon we're in the position to work with the DHB to make this a more feasible option for you. So we've got a really active and really proactive community here. We think we can secure the land and manage the creation of the facility if the DHB would like to work with us. So that's, we haven't announced it yet because we're waiting to kind of see what happened, but we're really keen to make this happen. And I think there's a really good opportunity for us to work together in that respect. Maybe not with Rufus.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, and like that's one of the things that's fantastic in rural New Zealand is that kind of community energy and people taking the initiative around how to make things work. I think regardless of what decision gets made about a location of a unit, we're going to want to work with you. Because you are the guys who are here on the ground, you're delivering the services, you're the people who are using the services, and you're the people who care enough about your community that you're putting that kind of time and energy into future-proofing and delivering great services. So, if that's an offer to have a chat, we're absolutely up for doing that and working out what can we do. It's tricky when we're in these positions around making a decision because we obviously have to manage any perceptions around conflict of interest, and it's potentially a very big investment in public funding, so we have to be provide due diligence and probity and all the rest to those kinds of conversations. But I think we do want to work together, and as I said at the beginning, we talked about the fact that we're starting a conversation, and I'm keen to keep that conversation going. And I think this consultation has given us a real chance to explore that, that it's not just about a unit, it is about that support. It is about, Heather often describes the rural primary birthing units as being like the emergency room for maternity care in those areas. And we know that the knowledge and competency sits with the LMC midwives. So supporting you is incredibly important. So yeah, absolutely. Let's keep talking and let's keep working together on what solutions and what a good mix of services looks like. But in the meantime, we have to keep stepping through this process as well. But we don't, I should say, like in some respects, this is about picking a place and determining where to put up some bricks and mortar. What's in it, who's involved, how you're involved is all still up for discussion.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a mum in the district, so I've got two children here at one at high school and one at Harvey Flat Primary School. I'm also a midwifery student about to graduate and hopefully join the workforce here in Wanaka. And one thing that I did want to mention today is I know at the last meetings you've talked about your projection that the childbearing population in this area is actually set to decrease in the next couple of decades. We've talked today about the investment of public money and sort of, people like yourselves being accountable for making the right decisions. But it's confusing that hasn't been unpacked into each town. I know we've got the Ministry of Education have committed something like $43 million to our high school. We've got a new primary school in the district, and we've also got plans for 4 to 8 new classrooms out at Hawea, which was historically just a little farm primary school. So I just wonder if that overall decrease in childbearing people in the district it's not an accurate number to kind of group up as one, and that Wanaka may in fact have this projected huge increase that we're not capturing there when we take that data to the next level. And is there a decrease set to happen in another areas such as Cromwell? I think we can't make that one big projection because the Ministry of Education have made huge commitments to our younger population, who will in time become our childbearing population. So we need to look at that a bit closer, and that these numbers here may in 10, 20 years be quite a bit different.
And I think that's been a really interesting part of the conversation since the Cromwell meeting. I mean, you're right, those high-level stats are based on kind of high-level national and international projections about what's happening with fertility rates, which is a combination of people having fewer babies. There are fewer families now with 3 or 4 kids as opposed to 1 or 2, so it's just that cumulative effect of people, the same number of people might still have babies, but they're having fewer of them. But you're right, that doesn't necessarily capture what's happening at a micro level in individual communities. And we see that throughout the district, where you could give one level of stats for, let's say, older people, but we know our older populations are concentrated in particular towns, and likewise some of that younger populations concentrated in particular towns. And it's really hard to kind of have the crystal ball and look into the future and know for definite where that's going to go. There's a lot of factors like how COVID plays out, decisions around airports and things like that in this area that will have a huge impact on what happens with those families. But I guess what we are trying to do is make sure we hear that. And I do hear what you're saying about the school numbers, and you're right, the Ministry of Education, because they've got to act now, because there's 30 kids there that need a classroom for next year.
I think they needed to act 20 years ago, and we're feeling the effects of that. So we don't want this to be what happens with maternity as well. So, we thought that the childbearing population is going to go down, and then we haven't really got something in place that's suitable for purpose for one particular portion of that community.
Yeah.
I was going to say, in this community that there's already 2 children per household is the norm here, and we've got an older, we're a lot of the mums here are sort of my age, we're kind of in our mid to late 30s when we're having our first children, and most people aren't having 3 to 4 kids now, so those projections could well be on that level now, and the population is going to continue to grow.
Yeah, just because there's literally just more families here. Yeah, absolutely. Can we just get the mic to you?
So I moved to Wanaka 2 years ago, and people are saying, oh, well, when you have a baby, there's nothing there for you. I got married, I got pregnant, I've had my baby, I've now returned to work, and we're still having the same conversation. I am one of many mums on my Facebook chat group right now telling them about what's happening. None of them can be here today because they've all got busy toddlers. I'm concerned that we're losing, it's such a small percentage of the population that this affects. And when you're pregnant and it's a really big deal. Once you've had your baby, it's history. I'm just a very motivated person to be here to make it happen. And so I feel like I'm so grateful for everybody that is here to keep up that momentum. I agree with what you're saying, that our childbearing population is only going to increase, and I just want to get on with it. I'm so frustrated that the conversation I had before I even moved here, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
And being pregnant in Wanaka is so emotional. God, the amount of counselling Deb had to give me about where I'm going to give birth. There's that side of it that's not being discussed, the emotion. It's horrible. So I think I speak for a lot of women in Wanaka when it's just really, really tough to be pregnant here without any support from the DHP.
Thank you. And I think that piece on the emotion actually really does come through on the online consultation. Person after person told us their story and their experience exactly as you described, from all across this area about how hard that feels, and yeah, because it's huge. Like when having your babies is huge. It's like one of those big moments in your life, and you want to know you're safe. You want to know what you need is there. So we do hear that, and we're really mindful of that. And thanks for coming and telling us and speaking for the group that you're talking to.
Sorry, I don't want to monopolise the meeting, but I just couldn't, I can't restrain myself. I didn't introduce myself properly before. I'm Emma Villas. I started the first midwifery practice to be based here in Wanaka back in the 90s. I've been involved in midwifery, and still am involved in midwifery now here. 10 years ago, I moved into midwifery education primarily, and so we've been educating women like Deb and Katie to be able to become midwives without having to leave their rural community, because we have really strong evidence that that's how you support your rural health services, by educating those people. And I just have to say that it feels like it's been a long time for you, but it feels like a very long time for me. And the simple fact is, when we look at the service specifications, in 2003, we passed those numbers to say that we should have a birthing facility within an hour here in Wanaka. So we've been waiting 17 years at this point. My hope is that my children, who are now 23 and 21, will have a place to have their baby so they don't have to leave home to do it. I didn't think I would ever be in this position. I thought it would have happened a long time ago. And so I think bringing us back, we're talking about facts and figures. I think the work you're doing is fantastic, because it does feel like for the first time in all of this time we've got some real momentum and forward movement. But I think if we do take that step back and step away from the facts and figures, we think about what we've heard from the Wanaka community. It's really important. Birth is actually a community event, and we will change our community if we can be born here. And although we haven't had necessarily a strong voice from the Maori population here, we do know that the Maori population utilise primary units far greater than anyone else. It is a nod to the social side of birth as well, and I think that we need to build that into our conversation that we're having around it. We also need to build in some ethical principles, because actually in those 17 years, every Wanaka family that has had a baby, that has had to have go through those incredibly complex organisational things to actually get to where they need to have the baby, all of those families that have had to bear the cost of travel, all of those families that have had babies born before they arrived anywhere. There has been a cost in this community, both material and emotional and social, and I think this is the opportunity now, when you're hearing really loud from Wanaka, to redress some of those things and make it right. And so all of those, although it's a very complicated decision in terms of details, there's a really simple decision about what's right and what's wrong, and actually putting something here in Wanaka is actually, I think, the right decision.
Great, Peter Hosking, go black. Great job. Not going to do as great as Peter. I just wanted to quickly add, when you said about the home birth rates, I found it quite interesting when you go back to that slide of mine and Deb's numbers, that there's 31 home births there and only 24 at Charlotte Jean. That's not all choice of home, though most of those ladies had to birth at home because they could not make the travel. Like Hannah in the corner over there. They couldn't take it to the unit. They were going to choose Charlotte Jean. So the utilisation would increase because most of our home birth rate would decrease, which is kind of sad, but that's how it would work. So
I was made to go to Charlotte Jean, but it was full. I was made to go to Charlotte Jean that evening, but it was full. We were told there was space, and then they called again, and someone had dropped out and it was full. So yeah, I suppose that's why we're here. Like, I didn't, it did go okay, we were fine, and I fed well and everything was all right, but it could have been opposite.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we've heard that too, that people are choosing home birth not because they really have this huge desire to have a baby at home, but because the logistics of juggling toddlers and the work commitments and everything else just make it too difficult to do otherwise. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this information, because that was why I used the 40% as the upper limit instead of just using 30%, because we can see that you already have a high utilization of primary maternity settings.
Well, we have great LNCs who support primary birth as well, which is really important and why our numbers are so high in our area. But we also have our women are low risk, like Yeah, mostly fit, healthy women live in Wanaka. I'm not one of them. Do as they say, not as I do. Too busy working. So, yeah, I think most of our population could birth locally if they would choose to, you know, if they were supported to.
Yes, Linda.
Just another follow on as well from what Peter and from what all of the midwives here are saying about the hidden costs. You know, only last weekend I had a birth through the gorge, you know, on a reserve that had we had a birthing unit in Wanaka, we could have had a beautiful birth in Wanaka. And we just didn't make it. And while in the moment people are getting on and doing what they're doing, actually the emotional toll and the shock on the partners were really huge, and there's going to be some sequelae from that we need to look back on. I also had to utilise ambulances in the gorge, and one came from either direction. So when you talk about extrapolating costs, there's loads of little costs, like Emma spoke to, that we would completely do away with if we were local. And just also to the point about not having that, you know, 24/7 cover, it really is a belief of mine, because we actually have a good contingent of midwives in Wanaka and surrounds, and not everybody wants to be an LMC midwife, but they want to do midwifery care. And if there was a if there was a primary birthing unit here, they would come to the fore and be happy to work shift work, etc., so that it can fit in with their lives. Because as Peter's saying, when you're an LMC midwife, we are providing 24-hour care all of the time, and that's just not feasible for everybody. So it's those other considerations. We have needed this for a while, and I think it's just becoming more and more obvious. But I think if you extrapolated out those other costs that we don't think about in the long run, but are directly related to the events of not being born where you plan, we'd probably still be even more.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. So I think, I feel we've heard loads, and there's lots for us to go away and digest. And, you know, I would like to assure people that, you know, we're putting up the utilisation numbers and everything, but this isn't, we have to take cost and affordability into account, but this isn't purely cost exercise. If it was a purely cost exercise, the discussion wouldn't even be on the table, because it's, you know, the numbers and ratios are such that supporting rural birthing is always going to cost more, but it is about doing what's right for the communities and doing that in a way that's sustainable and as cost effective as we can make it. So all of those factors will come into play. But you've given us an awful lot to think about in terms of working on the paper. And myself and Demelza have an interesting week or two ahead, getting our heads around that and starting to get all this, trying to synthesize all of what we've heard and make sure that that we're presenting as balanced and as good a point of view as we can to the board. Is there any other comments that people really wanted to make today, or anything that's burning with anyone that they didn't get a chance to say? Yes,
I was going to say one last thing, so I'm getting a little bit emotional now, but
yeah.
I didn't introduce myself properly before, but I started the Save Our Wanaka Midwives group, and I had my baby on the floor of my midwife's office. And thank God it was Deb and Peter, and they were amazing, but nobody should have to do that. That's just so wrong. That is so, so wrong. And so many women are suffering. They've had their babies in places that aren't fit for purpose. And what's it gonna take? It's Russian roulette. How much longer are we gonna let this happen? We have to do something. It's not good enough, and it's not fair, and it's not sustainable. So let's make a change. It's up to you guys. You're the voice. Please speak for us. And don't let somebody die, okay? That's it, sorry.
That's okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess we're starting from the place of a change needs to happen, because none of the 4 options are status quo. So, and I know not all options are what you'd like to see of a unit in Wanaka. But the place that we're starting from is where we are now isn't where we're going to go. So there does need to be a change. So.
Thank you. Is there anything else? Is there anybody? Yeah, good point. Thank you, Linda, for reminding me. Anybody on Zoom?
don't have any questions here on Zoom, but any of my Zoom team, if you'd like to, ask any questions. I did have one that came through earlier today looking for data across the district of women who birth elsewhere, and we can provide that separately because I don't think we have it with us.
Yeah, we do have that.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it's on these slides or
No.
not, but yeah,
It's
not on this slide, but yeah. It wasn't as big as I thought it would be actually. Most people are birthing in the district, but there are some people who go to Christchurch or go to Wellington even. Some of that is driven by that's where families are.
Sorry, I think it was more going to Dunedin or Invercargill rather than
birthing en route. Actually, we can't. It's a real problem is that those numbers are not collected. We don't. There is a code that picks up babies born not an expected place or something like that. But before arrival, that's it. But it's about 2 years lag on that one for some reason. So but we know it happens, and we hear the stories about it happening, and we've heard about Linda's baby last week, and we've heard about your experience, Chrissy, and we know it happens. So that is being taken into account. We want to try and avoid that happening as much as possible.
If you know, though, you need to communicate that because you knowing it and it being represented in the data.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what the DHB is going to look at, and you need to include that.
We need to include that. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, listen, thank you all so much for turning up. We do realise this is a huge issue for a lot of people here, and we really appreciate your time and appreciate the energy and passion and commitment that you've put into making sure we've heard you. And as I said, we're going to go away now and digest that, and no doubt we'll probably have further conversations in the months to come, but we appreciate everything we've heard, and we'll be doing our best to reflect that in the decisions that we recommend to the board. Thank you all very much. Okay. Thank you.